It was a cold, grey day, the kind of day that drags you down into a pit of heaviness, as if the clouds above have decided to grieve with you. The cemetery was silent except for the wind that seemed to whisper sorrow through the tall trees, shaking their branches like they too were mourning. In the distance, a small group of people stood in a quiet circle, their faces pale, eyes red from the weight of loss. But it wasn't them that drew attention, it was the dog. The scruffy, golden retriever with eyes full of pain, sitting motionless on the freshly dug grave of a girl who had been taken too soon. Her family stood silent, unsure of what to make of the scene. Was this dog grieving for her too? Or was there something more, something unexplainable, that even the most hardened hearts could not deny? No one could say not yet. But in the soft shiver of the dog's fur, in the way it sat, still as stone, there was a shift. Something in the air that stirred, just enough to make the world feel like it might turn in another direction. And then, in that fleeting moment, when time seemed to hold its breath, something miraculous happened, something only the closest of companions could understand. The dog stood, walked to the grave, and sat once again, but this time, it wasn't just sitting, it was waiting. Waiting for something that only it knew would come, something no one else could see. And then it happened. The sky hung heavy with grief, and the cold wind swept through the cemetery as if it too had a sorrow to bear. Mourners stood, their black coats rustling softly in the breeze, their heads bowed in silence. In the center of it all, a fresh grave marked the loss of a young girl, a daughter, a friend. She had been taken in an instant, and nothing could prepare her family for the emptiness that followed. Her mother, clinging to the flowers she had placed on the grave, trembled as tears traced the lines of her weathered face. And there, amidst the sorrow, was the dog, a golden retriever, its fur matted with age and rain. It sat unmoving by the grave, its eyes locked onto the earth where the girl now rested. The world around it seemed to blur. Nothing was more important than this moment, than the weight of its loyalty. The girl's father stood a few paces away, his hand gripping his son's shoulder, trying to stay strong. The mother looked to the dog, her heart aching in ways she couldn't explain. How did this creature know? How did it understand the depth of their grief? She closed her eyes, trying to breathe through the sorrow. But when she opened them again, the dog was still there, watching, waiting. Its loyalty was unwavering, as if it had been born to sit by this grave, forever bound to this place. The mourners began to move away, leaving only the family and the dog. The sky darkened. The dog didn't stir. Days passed. The grave became a place of quiet reverence, but also of confusion. The dog remained, sitting in the same spot. Even when the rain came pouring down, washing over the earth and soaking its fur, it didn't move. The family noticed the dog more now. The mother would come by after work, her footsteps faltering as she saw the dog unmoved, still staring at the grave. There was something about the way it sat, something almost sacred. At night, the family would go to bed only to wake and see the dog still there. And then, one evening, the dog collapsed. Its legs gave way, and it fell to the ground beside the grave, its body trembling. The mother rushed to its side, but the dog didn't react. It lay there, breathing shallowly, as if it were waiting for something. But what? The air around the dog seemed to hold its breath. And then, just as the family was about to take it inside, the dog stood, its legs shaky, but strong enough to make a slow, determined step forward, its head tilted toward the grave, and it sat again, as if it had completed its mission. The night was heavy, thick with the weight of loss. The family stood around the grave once more, staring at the dog, its fur stained with mud. The grave itself felt like a silent abyss, waiting to swallow them whole. But tonight, something was different. The dog stood once again, moving toward the grave with a new sense of purpose. The mother reached out, her hand trembling as she stroked the dog's fur. "She's gone," she whispered. "How do you know this? Why do you stay here?" The dog's eyes locked with hers. There was something in them, something that made her heart stop. It wasn't sadness, it was understanding. Deep, profound understanding. The dog's presence seemed to fill the empty space around them, pulling the weight of grief from their shoulders, piece by piece. And then, the impossible happened. The wind picked up, and the leaves rustled. A faint warmth spread through the air, just enough to make them feel her presence. Soft, distant, but real. The dog's tail wagged once. Just once. And in that moment, the mother felt the weight of her loss lighten, just a fraction. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were no longer the tears of despair. They were the tears of release. The dog no longer sat alone. The family, hesitant at first, began to come to the grave every evening, their hearts softer, lighter than before. They would sit with the dog, talking in hushed voices, telling stories of their daughter, of their memories. The dog would listen, its head tilted as if in deep thought, as if it too was remembering. One evening, the mother sat beside the dog, her hand resting on its fur. "I miss her," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "I wish I could hold her one more time." The dog nudged her hand gently as if to say, "It's okay, she's still here." The air around them felt warmer. The clouds parted slightly and the sun peeked through, casting a golden light over the grave. It wasn't just a grave anymore. It was a place of connection, a place where life and death met in a quiet, sacred dance. As the days went on, the family began to heal. The dog was no longer just an animal mourning a friend. It had become a part of their journey, a reminder that love in its purest form transcends even the deepest sorrow. One day the sky cleared. The sun shone brightly over the cemetery, and the family stood together, hand in hand. The dog sat between them, its eyes calm, its presence peaceful. The family no longer felt lost, they felt found, and in that moment they knew. Their daughter was never truly gone. She had simply changed, and somehow they had been given the strength to move forward. As the dog looked up at them, its tail wagged once more, a quiet promise that life, no matter how difficult, would continue. And in its eyes, the family saw a reflection of their daughter's spirit, forever living on in the love they shared. The dog stood, and so did they, ready for the next chapter. And just as the sun dipped below the horizon, they knew they had not been abandoned. They had been carried forward together. Always. It had been weeks since the dog first sat on that grave, and yet, every day felt like a new chapter in the story of healing that the family had no choice but to write. The mother, once consumed by grief, found herself waking with a softer heart. The father, whose silence had weighed heavier than the loss itself, began to speak again, his words filled with life. The children, once too young to understand death's reach, now looked at the world through a lens of love and memory. But still, the dog was the anchor. Every evening as the sun set, casting its warm golden hues over the land, the family found themselves gathered at the grave. Not in mourning, but in reverence. The dog had somehow shown them how to embrace both the pain and the beauty of their daughter's passing. There was no more fear in their hearts. There was only love, deep, everlasting love that refused to let go. One evening, the mother sat beside the dog, her hands gently stroking its fur as the wind whispered through the trees. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh earth and rain. She had come to learn that the dog wasn't just mourning the girl. It was mourning alongside them, with them. In its silence, the dog had taught them the language of grief, how to carry it, how to hold it with tenderness, how to move through it, inch by painful inch. The girl's father, who had once been distant, now approached the dog, a look of quiet understanding in his eyes. He knelt beside it, and without a word rested his hand on its back. The dog's ears perked, and for a moment, there was a softness between them, a bridge that had been built with every silent night spent beside the grave. In that stillness, the family found peace. One night, as the wind howled through the trees and the rain poured down in heavy sheets, the family came to the grave once more. But tonight was different. Tonight, there was a sense of urgency in the air, as if something was about to shift again. The dog, still as ever, was by the grave, but it seemed to be looking at something beyond it, beyond the physical world. The family stood at a distance, unsure of what to do. The mother approached slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached the grave, the dog looked up at her, its eyes full of understanding and something more. Something ancient, something wise. She knelt beside the dog, placing a hand on the ground. The rain lashed against her skin, but she didn't flinch. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch forever, the ground beneath her hand pulsed with warmth. It was subtle at first, just a faint vibration that she almost mistook for her own heartbeat. But then it grew, filling her chest, her soul with a deep, comforting heat. She gasped, her eyes wide as she looked at the dog. The dog's tail swished gently, as if in acknowledgement. In that moment, the mother felt her daughter's presence more than ever before. Not in the way of memory, but in the way of something real, something tangible. Her daughter was with them. Not in the grave, not in the past, but here now in the space between them and the dog. It was as if the world had parted, revealing an invisible bridge that connected the living to the departed. The mother's breath caught in her throat, and she held her hand to her chest, as if to keep from shattering into a million pieces. The days grew longer, the air warmer, as spring gently made its way through the earth. The family no longer visited the grave out of obligation or sorrow. They visited because they had learned to live alongside the pain. They had learned to carry the weight of grief with grace, and to find meaning in their daughter's absence. The dog, still ever present, had become a symbol of their journey, of their strength, their resilience. The mother began to speak of the future more openly, her words no longer cloaked in despair. She spoke of memories, but also of hopes, for the children's lives, for the family's future, for the dog that had taught them the impossible. The father, who had once struggled with finding the right words, now smiled more often, his laughter filling the house as the days grew warmer. They no longer feared the darkness. They had learned to find light in the most unexpected places, to see beauty in the world despite the scars it carried. And each day, with every passing moment, the dog remained by their side, a silent, steadfast companion who had not only watched over their daughter's grave, but had also watched over their hearts. And one day, as the family gathered under the wide, endless sky, the dog stood, its eyes fixed on the horizon. It had spent countless days beside the grave, but it had never looked forward. Now, it was ready to lead them into the future. The family stood together hand in hand, as the dog walked slowly toward the open field ahead. It wasn't the end of the journey. It was only the beginning. The days stretched on, each one a delicate thread woven into the tapestry of their healing. The dog had become a constant, its presence now so familiar it felt as if it had always been a part of their story. And yet, as with all things, the time came for the family to take one final step, the step toward letting go. The mother, whose heart had once been shattered by loss, now stood in front of the grave, her eyes clear, her shoulders strong. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, the soft rustle of the trees in the breeze. The dog, standing beside her, looked up at her with a quiet intensity. There was nothing more to say. There was nothing left to prove. She placed a single white flower on the grave, a symbol of the peace they had found. And as she did, she knew, without a doubt, that her daughter was not gone. She lived on in the love they shared, in the moments of joy, in the quiet strength that had brought them together. The dog, with its knowing eyes and unwavering loyalty, stood as a bridge between two worlds. And in that final moment, when the family let go of the past and stepped forward into the future, they understood love, in its purest form, never ends. It simply transforms. The seasons passed, and with each one, the family moved through life with a quiet strength, their hearts full of the lessons learned from the dog that had watched over them in their darkest hours. The dog, older now, its once strong body showing the signs of time, continued to be their guide. Its presence was a constant reassurance, a reminder of the unconditional love that had not only sustained them through the loss, but had led them to a deeper understanding of what it meant to live, to love, and to let go. The mother, who had once stood at the grave, lost and broken, now found herself standing in front of her children, telling them stories about the dog. She spoke of its loyalty, its silent strength, and the way it had bridged the gap between grief and hope. The children, who had once asked in confusion where their sister had gone, now spoke of her with smiles, telling tales of the moments she had brought them all together. They had learned that love was not bound by time, and neither was memory. One evening, as the family gathered on the porch, the dog lay quietly at their feet, its once bright eyes now dimmed with age. But there was still a spark, a fire within it, as it looked up at the family with a gaze that said everything. I have been here all along. I have shown you what love truly is." The wind whispered softly, the night calm and still. The family sat together in peaceful silence, knowing that in their hearts, their daughter would always be with them. Not in a grave, not in the past, but in the present, living on through them. And in the dog's quiet gaze, they saw the reflection of their daughter's spirit. Alive, always in the love that had transcended death, in the bond that no force could sever. As the years went by, the dog's steps became slower, its once vibrant energy fading into the background of the family's daily life. Yet the bond it had forged with them was as strong as ever. The family now had their own children, little ones who would grow up hearing stories about the dog who had been there when they needed it most. They would grow up hearing about how that dog had helped them find the courage to face the hardest days and the strength to believe in something greater than themselves. The mother, who now sat in the garden, her hands gently brushing the dog's fur, thought of how far they had come. It was hard to imagine a time when their hearts had been broken, when the grief of losing their daughter had felt unbearable. But now, looking at her family, her children laughing and playing in the distance, she realized how much had changed. They had healed, not because they had forgotten, but because they had learned to carry their daughter's memory with them, to honor her spirit through their actions, through their love for one another. One evening, as the dog lay in the sun, its breathing shallow and soft, the mother felt a deep stillness in the air. She looked down at the dog, now a quiet presence in their lives, and smiled. It had been there through everything, the laughter, the tears, the sorrow, and the joy, and now it had reached the end of its journey. As if sensing the moment, the dog slowly raised its head and looked up at the mother, its eyes filled with a deep, peaceful understanding. The mother, her heart full of love, bent down and whispered to the dog, "Thank you for everything." In that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a soft golden glow, the dog lay its head down once more, a final breath escaping its body. It had fulfilled its purpose. It had guided them, healed them, and showed them the power of love. The family, standing together, understood the gift they had been given. They had not only been saved from their own grief, but had also learned how to love in a way that transcended all boundaries, even death. The dog's passing was not an end. It was simply a continuation of the journey, a journey that would never truly be over. Years passed, and the dog's memory lived on in the heart of the family. They had long since moved on from the grief that had once consumed them. But the lessons they had learned, the quiet wisdom the dog had imparted, stayed with them forever. They raised their children with love, teaching them the importance of loyalty, of family, and of carrying the memory of those they loved with them, no matter where life took them. And when the family finally found their way back to the cemetery, to the grave where it all began, they did so not with sorrow, but with gratitude. They stood together, the dog no longer with them in body, but present in spirit, as it always had been. They had come full circle, from loss to healing, from grief to acceptance, from pain to peace. The family had become what they had never thought possible. A family that had not only survived, but had thrived in the face of heartache. They had become a testament to the love that had transcended death, a living legacy of the dog who had never left their side. As the family stood before the grave, the wind picked up again, the soft rustle of leaves whispering through the trees. And for the first time in years, the mother felt her daughter's presence. Not in sorrow, not in longing, but in peace, in love. The dog's work had been completed, and in that moment the family understood. Their daughter, their beloved girl, was never truly gone. She was in the very air they breathed, in the love that they shared, in the lessons they carried forward. The circle of love, of life, of family, it was eternal. And as they turned to leave, the sky opened up in a burst of light, the first rays of dawn illuminating the horizon. The family walked forward together, knowing that they were never truly alone. It had been a year since the dog passed, and in the quiet mornings that followed, the family had found peace in a new kind of rhythm. Life had moved forward, and yet there was still a sense that something, or rather, someone, was missing. The house was quieter now, but there was a softness that had replaced the sharpness of grief. In the mornings, the children played outside, their laughter filling the air, and the mother and father found themselves often standing together, watching, reflecting. They had survived the hardest parts of their journey, but their hearts were forever marked by the love they had for their daughter, and by the love that had carried them through it all. One day, as the sun hung low in the sky, the father came to the backyard, a small box in his hands. The mother was sitting on the porch watching the children run around, and when he approached her, she smiled softly. It was the kind of smile that only those who had been through the worst of times could truly understand. He sat beside her, placing the box between them. "I think it's time," he said quietly, his voice filled with a tenderness that surprised even him. The mother's eyes searched his, and for a moment, they said everything that needed to be said. She opened the box, her fingers brushing against something soft and familiar. Inside was a collar, the one the dog had worn every day. It was worn, the leather slightly frayed from years of use, but it was still there. With a sigh, the mother took the collar in her hands, and for the first time since the dog passed, she smiled, a real smile, not of sorrow but of gratitude. "I think it's time too," she whispered. They walked together to the place where the dog had spent so many days by the grave. The very spot where their hearts had first been opened, and where they had learned the true meaning of love and loss. The children followed them, curious and excited. As they reached the place, the mother kneeled and gently placed the collar on the ground. "This is where it all began," she said softly. "And this is where it will always stay, in our hearts." The father placed his hand on her shoulder, and the children gathered around, the wind picking up around them, as if nature itself was blessing the moment. There was no longer sadness in their hearts, no longer a longing for what had been lost. Instead, they stood together in the stillness of the evening, their hearts full of the love that had never left them. The dog's collar, now resting on the earth, was more than a memory. It was a symbol of the journey they had traveled, of the love that had carried them through the darkness, and of the miracle that had brought them back to life. The months that followed were filled with growth. The family had learned to live again, to love again, to embrace the fleeting moments that made life beautiful. They continued to visit the grave, no longer as mourners, but as a family that had learned to carry their grief and love with them as they moved forward. Each visit felt like a step further away from the pain, and yet, every step they took was rooted in the deep connection they had with their daughter, with the dog, and with each other. The children had begun to understand the lessons of loyalty, love, and loss. They had learned from the dog's unwavering devotion that family is not just about blood. It's about the bonds we create, the love we give and receive, and the moments that shape us. They began to tell stories about the dog, stories that filled their hearts with joy rather than sadness, stories that helped them remember what they had been given, not just what they had lost. And so, life continued, not as a perfect picture, but as something richer, something more real. The mother who had once been consumed by grief now spent her days in a quiet peace, the weight of her loss still there, but no longer ruling her. The father who had once kept his emotions locked away now shared his thoughts more openly, his laughter echoing in the home. And the dog, though it was no longer with them in body, was still with them, in every lesson, every moment of love, every soft whisper of the wind that seemed to speak its name. As the family walked down the path one evening, the sky painted with the softest shades of purple and gold, they looked at one another, knowing they had come a long way. They had lost, yes, but they had also gained. They had been given a gift that would never fade. And when the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a gentle glow, the family understood one thing: love never ends. It simply transforms. As the family stood together, the evening air cool against their skin, the last light of day melted into the horizon. The children, their laughter still echoing in the distance, came running back, their hearts light with joy. The mother and father exchanged a quiet look, one that spoke of years of pain, healing, and, most importantly, love. They no longer needed to search for their daughter in the grave or in memories alone. She lived in them, in the way they loved, in the way they moved through the world with open hearts. And as the family turned to walk back home, the dog, though no longer there in body, seemed to walk beside them, its spirit lingering in the gentle breeze, its presence still comforting them. The sun had set, but in the quiet space between the stars, they felt the warmth of its light, a light that would never fade as long as they carried it in their hearts. The circle had closed. And in that moment, the family knew, love never truly leaves us. It simply stays in different forms in different times, but it stays forever. As they walked back home, the gentle rustle of the leaves seemed like a soft reminder from the past. Whispers of the love that had shaped them, had carried them, had healed them. The family, though scarred by loss, now walked with a strength that could only be forged through deep, unspoken bonds. They had learned that grief, while a fierce companion, could not hold them hostage forever. It had been a part of their journey, but it had not defined them. The memory of their daughter, the dog's unwavering loyalty, and the quiet moments they had shared at the grave had woven together a story of resilience. They no longer felt the weight of an unfinished chapter. They had come to understand that while loss had taken much from them, it had also given them something they hadn't expected, the ability to love in a way that transcends even the hardest of times. As the stars slowly appeared, one by one, the family reached their doorstep. The home that had once felt so hollow now felt full of memories, yes, but also full of hope. Their journey wasn't over. It was just beginning, shaped by the lessons of the past, but focused on the future they would create together. In that moment, the mother closed her eyes for a second, feeling the cool night air brush against her skin. She didn't need to look up to know that the stars above had never been brighter. They were a reflection of everything they had gone through. Darkness, yes, but always followed by light. With a heart full of peace and a soul touched by love, she whispered softly, "We've made it. We're okay." And as they stepped inside, the warmth of the house embraced them, just as the love of their daughter and the loyalty of the dog would forever embrace their hearts. As they crossed the threshold into their home, the familiar creak of the door felt different this time, like a doorway leading not just to a house, but to a new chapter. The quiet hum of the kitchen, the soft glow of the hallway light, the rooms filled with memories, these were no longer spaces filled with echoes of sorrow. Now, they felt like spaces where healing had begun to settle, gently taking root. The children ran up the stairs, their footsteps light, their voices filled with the innocence and laughter that had always belonged to them, despite the storms they had weathered. The father stood at the doorway, watching them, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. He thought about how far they had come, how much they had endured, and how, despite it all, they had found a way back to each other. The loss of their daughter, though impossible to reconcile, had brought them closer, not just as a family, but as individuals who had learned to embrace their vulnerability, their love, and their capacity to grow from even the deepest wounds. The mother, her hand resting gently on her chest, took in the sound of the children laughing upstairs. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the peace that had settled over her, one that had taken time to cultivate. The pain was still there, but it was no longer the sharp, overwhelming force it once was. It had softened, reshaped by time, love, and the presence of the dog, whose memory would always live on in their hearts. She thought back to the days when she couldn't imagine waking up without a crushing weight in her chest, the days when grief had consumed her so completely she couldn't see beyond it. And yet, here she was now, standing in her home, a place that once felt empty, now feeling alive with presence, alive with the memory of a daughter who was forever a part of them, even in her absence. The father joined her at the window, the two of them standing side by side, watching the world outside, the golden light of dusk slowly fading into the deep blue of night. "I never thought we'd be here," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of both grief and relief. "But somehow we are." She smiled at him, her eyes reflecting the same quiet understanding. "We're here because we learned how to hold each other, how to love even when it felt impossible. And we've learned how to let go too." He nodded, his gaze turning toward the children, who were now laughing and playing, their joy filling the house. "Our journey didn't end with her," he said, almost as a whisper. "It began with her." They stood there in the quiet of the evening, a moment of reflection that held no rush. In that stillness, there was no need for words. They had come to understand, in the most profound way possible, that love was not something to be fixed or finished. It was something to be lived, carried forward, and passed on. The dog's presence in their lives had been a miracle, a force that had kept them together when they thought they might fall apart. It had been their silent guide, their constant companion, and the very embodiment of the love that had transcended loss. It had shown them that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about honoring what was lost, holding it close, and then moving forward, slowly, steadily, with grace. The wind outside picked up again, and the sound of the leaves rustling seemed like a soft whisper in the air, a reminder of everything they had endured, and everything they had gained. There was a quiet strength in that breeze, a strength that matched the quiet strength of the dog, who had waited by the grave until the family was ready to face the world again. And as the mother stood beside her husband, watching their children play, she realized something deep and profound. The love that had been shared between them and the dog was a gift, one that would never fade. It had taught them how to love without bounds, how to hold on and let go, and how to embrace the future with open hearts. The dog had given them the courage to keep walking, to keep living, to keep loving. And now, as the family walked forward into the future, they carried that lesson with them forever. The grief they had once thought would consume them had been transformed into something else, something more enduring, more powerful. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. And though the night sky above them was vast and filled with the stars, the family knew they were no longer walking alone. They had each other, the love that had endured through every trial, and the quiet presence of their daughter and the dog, whose spirits were always with them, guiding them into the future.